Hello, everybody. Welcome to Career Therapy's Escape Your Toxic Workplace and Achieve Career Contentment. Today, we're going to be talking about how to know if you're working in a toxic culture, what to do to combat that toxicity, and how you can approach the job search in a healthier, more mindful way. My name is Marty McGovern, or Coach Marty, as my clients call me, and I'm the founder of Career Therapy. I started my career out in the marketing space before moving into startups and consulting, eventually going into education technology, and now getting a master's in mental health to become a therapist. I try to combine everything I've learned from the business world on how to promote yourself and market yourself appropriately for a job with everything I've been learning in the mental health space in order to overcome blockers and find calm in your day to day life and bring those two things together to navigate the emotional and promotional sides of the job search and improve your career confidence. Now, why are we talking about toxicity today? Well, we're talking about toxicity because 1/5 of all employees consider their workplace a toxic space. And that's pretty startling. As we think about what a workplace is supposed to be, or at least what it's being sold to us as, it's very different than what the reality is for most people. And so we really need to take a good hard look at what our expectations are as we enter into the workforce, as we build our career, and as you get older in your career, as you work towards retirement. We want to have a realistic view of things at every single stage so that we're making the best possible decisions and not getting sucked into the toxic side of things. Now, why are toxic workplaces so terrible? Well, they increase this sense of fear and dread. If you've ever had those Sunday scaries, well, that's maybe a little bit of a yellow or red flag that says maybe you're in a toxic environment. So we want to listen to our gut. We want to listen to ourselves and we want to ask, how do I figure out the level of toxicity, the level of what I can tolerate in terms of toxicity, and what to do to mitigate that toxicity or to get out of the situation if it gets bad enough. So, toxic workplaces drain our energy, and it's up to us to reclaim that energy because companies will not do it for us. So, if you're feeling a lot of fear, if you're feeling a lot of dread, this presentation's for you. Now, we need to ask ourselves, what's wrong? I mean, work is work, right? What if we just go to work and it's just not a great place to work? Well, there's a lot of long-term impacts that a toxic workplace, toxic work environment, or toxic culture can have on you. From chronic stress to depression to increased levels of heart disease and cancer. We have to realize that companies are not built to protect our mental health. They're not built to take care of us and provide security. They are corporations that are revenue driven, that make business decisions based on those revenue goals. And, although there's a lot of rhetoric out there that is saying something else, really what we've seen in the world and in the economy today is if something can be automated, if budgets are cut, large populations of people are going to be laid off. And again, we're at work so much of our day, so much of our lives. We need to make sure that it's an environment that we can tolerate and it's an environment that we can hopefully flourish in at the very least. Tolerate at the very least and flourish in at our best. And so we want to avoid these long-term negative impacts of a toxic environment and try and get as good of an environment as possible in our career. But this is where you need to stop and take a look at your workplace. Not every workplace is toxic, but not every workplace is fulfilling. And most people are going to fall somewhere in between, somewhere in the average. And we need to ask ourselves, what is my work situationship, right? What is it that is going on at my company? Is this a normal thing that companies do and all companies kind of do it and it's not actually that toxic? Or is this something that is not normal? It's abnormal and it's really unhealthy and it's hurting people and it's hurting me? Or is this a place that is actually listening to me, fostering my security, fostering my growth, and helping me to to progress in my career, even if that means leaving the company, right? Most people are going to fall within that average, but we have to ask ourselves, where are we average toxic, average fulfilling, and what is our ability to handle the amount of toxicity that we're experiencing? Maybe if you haven't worked on some of your emotional issues, you know, even low levels of toxicity could be really overwhelming. And we might need to address some of those things in our personal lives in order to increase our tolerance of them in a workplace. But again, we don't want to increase our tolerance so much that we accept really bad behavior on the company's part. So we have to really keep that balance and ask ourselves, is this fulfilling? Is this average? Or is this toxic? And what do I need to do with that information? So, in today's presentation, we're going to be talking about how we get stuck and how we break free. And I've broken this down into 6 different sort of dating terminology, different types of ways to look at this because there are so many overlaps between the dating world and the job seeking and career development world. And the reason for that is because at the end of the day, both of them come down to relationships, building relationships, professional relationships, friendships, etc. It all comes down to people. We want the job search to be, this perfect system that works incredibly well. We want our careers to be these wonderful, straight line trajectories. But when you're dealing with people, things get messy. And that's what we're going to be getting into today. How do things get messy? What does that look like? How do you identify it? And how do you respond appropriately? So you can see we broke this down into a number of different areas, from catfishing to trauma bonding to self-loving and boundary setting, and we're going to be getting into what all these terms mean. So if you haven't heard them before, don't worry. The first one I want to start with is catfishing. Catfishing is something you've definitely heard of in the dating world. It's when, someone's photo doesn't match what they look like in reality. But what does that look like when it comes to companies? Well, companies are constantly catfishing. If you look at just the definition of what branding is, it's about putting forth your best possible version to get people to like you, right? So companies are catfishing all the time. Sometimes they're woke fishing. They have a very sort of like um, mission driven or socially driven consciousness, and I like to call that mission fishing as well, where they're trying to pull at your heartstrings. They're trying to, be like, we're like and this concept that your passion can be weaponized in order to get you to do things or to take lower pay or to do certain jobs that you normally wouldn't do. So we need to be really careful. And when we're looking at things like job descriptions, we need to realize that there's a lot of bait and switching happening. Job descriptions are not accurate representations of jobs. They are hypotheses of what the job might be. And it's up to you and the company to work together to define what that job will be and to set those boundaries. Companies will make false promises. They'll say that you can move around. There's a lot of mobility. There's a lot of growth. But then you actually go talk to people at the company and they're like, oh no, once you're in this role, you're in this role. Or, they actually haven't promoted anyone in the past 3 years because they keep saying there's hiring freezes and money issues. So don't let companies future fake you. And don't buy into the branding. One of the things I see all the time is I'll be coaching someone and they're desperate to work at a company like Google or some big name brand, right? I would die to work at that company. But then I turn around and get on my next phone call and someone's working at that company and they're like, I am desperate to get out of here. I want to leave. This place is not for me. And so we need to realize that brands are not reality. Job descriptions are not reality. And we need to, sure, we can be excited about things. I don't want to take away your excitement. But when you actually get into the job search, when you actually get into the role, you have to realize that it's not going to last. It's not forever. This brand, the shininess of it will wear off. And at the end of the day, you're just left with the people you're working with and the projects you're working on. And we want to know that those are going to be good things once we get in there. So how do we get away from this? How do we get away from this catfishing and keep our and protect ourselves? Well, I like to call it descaling, taking the scales off your eyes so that you can see again, right? The truth is that most companies kind of suck. Most companies are just people running around with their hair on fire trying to fix things, trying to do things, right? And the reason that they're hiring is because they're not hitting their goals. They're struggling. They need your help. And so when we go into these companies, we should have a little bit of taking them off the pedestal, right? Don't put them on such a high pedestal. Um, how many times have you been super excited to work for a company and then 6 months in, a year in, that excitement is gone, right? Most companies are the same. They're just places to work. So don't put so much emphasis on the brand name. Now, brand names are great for building your career long term, and we can talk about that, but don't get swept up in the hype. Also realize that your passion can be exploited. So it's good to be passionate. I want you to know your passions, but don't let your passions blind you. Realize that companies will use that. They'll say, we're a startup, we're really mission driven, we're a nonprofit, and they will use that information to get as much out of you as possible. And it's up to you to set boundaries because the company will not do that. Also, know that all work is transactional. This is not dating. This is not marriage. This is not personal relationships at the end of the day. A job is a transaction. You have a skill set, they have a problem. The two things meet. They pay you money, you solve the problem that makes them money. So if you're making them money, they're paying you money, everyone's happy. It's a transaction. It's when we get into this emotional stuff and when we start to think that this is my dream job and this is like where I'm going to live, the rest of my career, that's when things start to get really bad because dream jobs will change. Whether the management changes or your role changes or the company changes, everything is always changing. So we need to realize that just because you achieved that goal, you're in that company, you got that dream job, you will adjust to it. It's a beautiful thing that humans do. We adjust to our situations and you're going to want more, you're going to want different, you're going to, you know, change. And happiness is not a state, it's not a place that you stay. It is something you experience on this journey of growth. And this brings us to the next thing that companies do when they're trying to hook you, when they're trying to get you, right? Or even when you try to leave and they want to pull you back in, right? They are going to love bomb you. Now, what is love bombing? Love bombing is this process of building a shared fantasy and making you feel incredibly important. It's an excessive display of affection. And you see this during the hiring process, right? They might drag their feet for 3-4 months trying to interview you, but then at the very end, they're like, you're the most incredible person. We can't wait to get you to work here. And, we need you to sign this by end of day or agree to the job on the phone here. Right. And so we need to slow things down and we need to realize that this shared fantasy is something that can get us in trouble. And so be careful of grand gestures and isolation. And if you see yourself becoming codependent on a company, start to build some independence. How do we build that independence? Well, we do that through self-loving, knowing your strengths and weaknesses, focusing on relationships, both internally at the company and externally. Don't lose your external relationships by becoming a workaholic for a company that might lay you off at the end of the year, right? Accept your shortcomings. Know that it's okay that you can't do everything, that you shouldn't do everything, that being a jack of all trades just means they're going to dump more stuff on your lap, right? It is important to know who you are, what you're good at, what motivates you. I highly recommend something like the Enneagram or working with a coach in order to discover your strengths and weaknesses. And at the end of the day, separate your self-worth from your job as much as possible. Put a boundary up so that everything that's happening day to day at your job doesn't rule your emotional state. It's a really tough thing to do, but by working with a coach or by spending some time on your own, you can really develop this skill of separation and looking at work as work rather than as your entire life. And it's tough because you start to work on your self love, but then you go to work and they start to talk about how they're such a family. We're such a family. You're joining our family. Well, companies are constantly saying that they're families, but they never really tell you what kind of family. Are they a toxic family? Are they a supportive family? It's hard to say. It's hard to know, right? The more that they're saying they're a family, the more maybe some red or yellow flags should start to go up, because in reality, the employer employee relationship, again, is a transactional one. It's a contract. Families don't have written contracts. They don't have non-compete clauses. They can't fire you at will, right? There is an inherent power imbalance where they have the money, you you have to go in, they can dictate where you are, when you are, and all these different things. It's not a family, right? So if you're seeing that there's this high expectation of loyalty, and there's a lot of blurred boundaries, and they're not really respecting your time, well, that actually might be indicative of some families, right? Toxic families. So realize that this family faking that they do is not always healthy. And it's important for us to know that this isn't a family, this is a company, and that on average, people change jobs every 4 years. Even if you stay with this company for 10, 15, 20 years, it won't be the same company 20 years from now than it is today. So let your family be your family, or let your found family be your family, but don't make your company your family as much as they're going to try. Instead of relying on your company for a sense of family bonds, look towards people. Remember, I said it's all about relationships, right? And you can build relationships at your company, right? But realize that it's the relationships with those people at the company that are important, not the company itself. Those people might leave, go to another company. That relationship should stay with you. You might leave and go to another company. That relationship should stay with you. It is important to find your company insiders. It's important to always be seeking. I always say if you want to be monogamous in your life, but polyamorous in your career, right? Uh, don't feel like you can't talk to another company or network while you're at your job, or even entertain other offers when recruiters are reaching out, or even apply to things here and there just to see what your market value is. Companies will make you feel guilty about that, and they will make you, you know, anxious about it. But truthfully, at the end of the day, you should always be seeking. You should always be networking. You should always be, sending out feelers so that you're not trapped in this one company. So be layoff ready. Always be seeking, and don't get caught in the family trap. Now, what happens if you do get caught in that family trap? Well, this is where trauma bonding can come into play. Trauma bonding, whether intentional or unintentional, is when you get this sort of, really tight, almost really tight, unintentional bond with the company, where you'll do anything for them. You'll work weekends, you'll work nights, you'll take on work when other people get laid off, and you take that all on yourself. You're doing things that are outside of your normal expectations. It's all because there's this sort of cycle of inconsistent kindness and abuse, right? Oh my gosh, you're doing so well. Oh, but you're not doing this well enough. And you're doing so great, we're hyping you up. I'm really loving the work you're doing. But then when your review comes, it gets pushed off and pushed off, and your 6 month review happens at the 1 year mark, and your 1 year review never even happens, and there's not a promotion even though you've been putting in all that extra time, right? There's a lot of things companies do, from breadcrumbing, where they just give you enough to keep you going, right? Just a little bit of a percentage increase, but not enough to actually like keep up with inflation or something like that. They create this hope for a great future. Oh, the company's struggling right now, so we can't give any raises. But in the future, we're going to be doing so much better. So just stick around. Just stick around. This realization that you're at will and that nothing is truly secure is really tough, because it creates this trauma bond where you're relying on a company that's not a consistent source of security. Now, if your company is being consistent, doing good things, Remember the spectrum, right? Maybe you're at an average company and they're not being abusive with these things. That's fine. Stay there. Maybe you're at an above average company. That's fine. Stay there. But if you're at a company that's constantly flip flopping between emotions and making you feel good one day and then making you feel horrible the next, and you start to feel like, oh my gosh, I could never go anywhere else because I just have to do really well here, you might be stuck in a trauma bond. And in order to combat that, we need to set boundaries. What are your non work, non negotiables? Are you going to skip, therapy because you have to work? Are you going to skip hobbies because you have to work? Are you going to not hang out with your friends and family because you have to work? What are your non-work non-negotiables? Have you lost all your hobbies because of your job? Is your health declining? Are you not working out, not going to whatever the thing is, yoga or whatever the thing is that you want to be doing? Are you not engaging in life because of your job? We need to set those non-work non-negotiables. We should have a scope of work for our job, because if you've ever worked in advertising, there's this thing called scope creep, where they'll just keep trying to get more and more out of you. And you say yes and yes and yes and yes to a bunch of little things. Suddenly it's one huge thing. So having a clearly defined scope of work that's agreed upon with your manager, I suggest having like weekly or bi-weekly one-on-ones where you're checking in on your scope, checking in on your projects, talking about what's been completed, talking about what's being added, and constantly renegotiating your scope of work with your boss. Always a good thing to be doing. That's also brings us to tracking everything, in those meetings, having everything tracked and approved, and make sure you're not working on things that are unrelated to your job. We see this all the time where at the end, a 6 month or 1 year review, they say, well, you didn't, crush it in the things that we were expecting. And you're like, yeah, but that's because you gave me like 15 other things to do. And they're like, well, that stuff isn't actually part of the expectation. So it's great that you did that, but we're not going to give you a raise because you didn't do this other thing. Right. So we see this all the time. Track everything, get approvals, make sure you have a clear scope of work, and then ask yourself, what's the least amount of work I can do and not get in trouble? This is a weird question. And, it sounds like you're taking advantage of the company. But remember, they're saying, what's the least we can pay to get the most out of you? And I was working with someone once and they were like working at 120% capacity. And then they said, well, I could probably get down to like 80%, but they were very uncomfortable with it. Right. So they brought down their actual amount of work. They just, put hard boundaries on when they start and when they end work. And they really set some good boundaries. And they were freaking out because they thought that this was going to lead to them getting fired. And one day they got called into their boss's office and they were really scared. And they go in there and they're like, I've only been putting in 80%. I'm going to be in so much trouble. And their boss sits them down and goes, you've been doing an incredible job. We're giving you a promotion. So even at 80% capacity, this person was exceeding expectations. So what would that extra percentage even do for them in the long run? Probably not a whole lot. So ask yourself, am I doing too much? How much less could I be doing? And is that okay? And you got to find what's comfortable for you. Now, if all these things are happening and you're in this toxic environment, you might start to second guess yourself and start to almost feel like you're going crazy. This is called gaslighting. It's when companies are acting one way and telling you to do things and then constantly undermining your perceptions, memories, and sanity. In the most toxic environments, what this looks like is a boss saying, I need you to do this. You do that, you bring it to them, and they say, I didn't tell you to do that. Why'd you do that? And then you go, but you did tell me to do that. I've actually seen situations where people started recording conversations at their workplace in order to just realize that they weren't going insane, that this was being asked of them because it was happening so often. So if you're experiencing a lot of denial and contradictions, if they're withholding information, if they're constantly trivializing the work you're doing or saying that what you're doing is like not essential to the business, even though they're putting so much pressure on you to get it done really quickly, you know, basically, if they're twisting and reinterpreting your reality, it's important to say, wait a second, if you feel like you're going insane, there might be something going on. This is pretty extreme, and gaslighting can happen in really extreme ways. It can happen in really average ways. But generally speaking, what we want to do is we want to say, I trust my gut. I know what's real. And if you need to journal, if you need to track things, we need to do a lot of reality checking. So what I would recommend is Write down the things that people are saying. Keep good records. Journal about your experience. Don't let people tell you that things aren't happening when they are, right? So if you can keep a record for yourself of your reality, it'll help you not get sucked into theirs. It's also very important to have external support systems outside of the company, people that you can trust, people that you can talk to. It's, you might be tempted to complain to a coworker about your job, but that might get used against you, right? So, it's maybe your family, maybe your friends, maybe a coach, maybe a therapist, but someone who can root you in a reality that's not based in your company, right? And again, trust yourself. You're probably not insane, and they're probably not even doing it intentionally. Most of this stuff is not intentional, but it's happening. And so we need to be aware of it, and we need to protect ourselves from it. And this brings us to our final piece, which is handcuffing. You've heard of the golden handcuffs, right? But handcuffs can happen in so many different ways, right? You get stuck with a company because of golden handcuffs. They're paying you so much you could never possibly leave. You're dealing with ageism and seniority issues, right? Like, it's hard to get another job as a VP at another company. So you might just get stuck at a high level position because changing is so difficult versus, lower level positions that are more abundant, right? Dealing with ageism in the workplace. Well, I've been here so long, I only know what this company has given me. My skill set has gotten really narrow. I've only been doing this one really narrow thing. I don't know if I could do something else. And also loyalty and guilt. Companies will guilt the hell out of you to keep you at these companies, right? So really realizing that you don't owe them anything and they don't owe you anything ever, right? I've had people be working at companies for 30 years and then the company gets sold, or a new manager comes on, or a new CEO takes over, whatever the thing is, and they're just, you know, out the door after 30 years. And they get really upset about that. I had so much loyalty toward this company. I put so much into this company. Well, they don't care. Companies don't really value loyalty. Some do, and those might be the above average, great, fulfilling ones. But even companies that do value loyalty, remember, it's constant change. You never know when management will change. You never know when they'll be bought out by another, business. I had someone who was working at a company for 10 years and it was amazing and they loved every day of it, but then they got bought by an investment firm and their job has just been slowly changing over a 2-year period into something that was really fulfilling into something that's pretty toxic. So being ready for those changes and not getting handcuffed to your company is a really important thing. Knowing that you have autonomy keeps you safe. So how do we do that? Well, there's this great term called oystering. And oystering is when you finally get out of that job, whether it's due to a layoff or because you quit or you find something new, and you finally open the oyster and you can, like, Shawshank Redemption, throw your hands in the air, right? How do we make sure that we're doing this? Well, we're learning new skills, we're meeting new people, we're trying new things. And when we're out of that job, we continue to do all that and enjoy our freedom. So hopefully this breakdown has been helpful to kind of give you some insights into where companies are being toxic, what red flags and green flags and beige flags and yellow flags to look out for. Um, and just to realize that it's important to treat companies how they treat you. Companies are transactional. The people in companies are relational, but the company itself is transactional. Um, Companies are transactional. Companies are revenue focused. Companies overhype themselves. Companies do a lot of different things to get you to stay there, right? Retention is a big business in the corporate world. So if a company is being a bit more shady, a bit more, I don't know about this, start to build up your defenses, start to do things outside of the company, start to find your next thing. If they're being sunny and they're being awesome and supportive, then return that energy. I'm not saying treat every company terribly. I'm saying protect yourself no matter where you are. So the shadier they are, the more independent you need to be. The sunnier they are, the more you can kind of, give what they need, be a little bit more accommodating, right? But don't be hyper accommodating for a shady company. That's where we get into trouble. Treat companies how they treat you. And hopefully, if you do this right, you'll end up with career contentment. Instead of searching for a dream job, or instead of following your passion, all these things that can be used against you, things that can be exploited. Look for career contentment, a state of satisfaction, fulfillment, and happiness that an individual experiences in their professional life. It goes beyond mere job satisfaction and encompasses a deeper sense of well being derived from your career. It's often associated with purpose, alignment with personal values, and a positive work environment. Don't let companies take advantage of you. Protect yourself and become a conscious job seeker, someone who is searching with awareness, who is seeking without attachment, who understands their priorities, who knows their deal breakers, and who can make choices wisely. If you're interested in learning more about this stuff, if you're in a toxic space and you need help, let's chat. You can head to careertherapy.com and schedule a free consultation. I appreciate you tuning into this conversation about toxic workplaces, and I wish you the best of luck in your career development.